So a few weeks ago, Steam summer sale ended, and during that sale, Jedi Survivor was only $14. Now, I had played the original a few years ago and really enjoyed it, but had held off on buying the sequel due to the less than ideal performance issues and my almost empty wallet. However, with most of the performance issues now solved, and with the Steam summer sale ensuring that my wallet would be safely secured, I decided that now would probably be a good time to buy the game and see what it had to offer. And I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. The combat, the map exploration, recruiting new characters to Pylon Saloon, all of it felt refreshing and enjoyable. And the things I enjoyed the most about it were the 3 new lightsaber stances, specifically the crossguard stance. There are 2 reasons I love this stance. The first being that it's super powerful, and with patience and timing, it can destroy almost every enemy in the game. The second reason I like it is because everybody else hates it. It's because of this second reason that I decided to try and beat Jedi Survivor with only the crossguard stance, and without using the skill tree, and without healing. So that's exactly what I did. Here are the 5 rules I had to follow during this challenge. The first is that I cannot use the skill tree at all during my run. This means no new lightsaber abilities, no upgraded health or force meter, and no upgraded force abilities. I can still use naturally earned abilities obtained outside the skill tree, like push, pull, lift, slam, slow, and rage, but they cannot be upgraded. The second rule is that I can only use the crossguard stance. If I use a stance outside the crossguard stance to deal damage, I have to let the enemies kill me and reset from the last save point. The third rule is that I cannot use stims or meditation points to heal. I am allowed to use a golden ball of light that's on the floor or attached to an enemy to heal, however, and I am allowed to use meditation points to save progress, so that way I don't have to go all the way back through an encounter just to get to where I died. Quick side note, I discovered that in between breaks, that whenever I leave the game, Cal will heal back up to full health when I come back, whether I want him to or not. There's nothing I can really do about this, but I thought I would mention it for clarity's sake. The 4th and 5th rules are minor compared to the others, but still significant enough to mention. The 4th rule is that I cannot use BD1 to hack droids, and the 5th rule is that I cannot use Cal's lightsaber attacks whenever he embraces the dark side, since the game automatically reverts Cal back to single blade whenever you do. I can still use the dark side to kill enemies with force abilities, but I cannot attack them with my lightsaber at all. Now that all the rules are out of the way, it's time for me to show you my attempt at being Jedi Survivor without the skill tree and with only the crossguard. Hey, editor side note here. I forgot to mention that I'm also going to be using the warrior perk to make encounters 10 times more difficult for myself, because why not? Anyways, back to your normally scheduled programming. Going into Couresaunt, I realized that low texture stormtroopers might not be my only problem, as I proceeded to die 3 times before even gaining access to the crossguard stance. Normally, taking a hit wouldn't be much of a problem, since popping a quick stim would heal you right back up, but with no more healing allowed, even attacks from basic enemies could turn from slight annoyances to massive headaches. Thankfully for me though, I remember that patience is key, and after taking the next few fights much more slowly, the amount of deaths I suffered was significantly decreased. After that, the Ninth Sister wasn't too much trouble to deal with, especially with the crossguard's high damage, and neither was the platform full of Imperials, although that was probably because of Bode and Bravo. After arriving on Koboh, there isn't much standing between me and Grease's Saloon, as most enemies I encounter only appear in small groups, and the only required boss I had to face, Zeke, is just a normal enemy. The enemies in and around the forest raid do prove to be more of a challenge though, especially the Val Biolemaw and Stormtrooper Squad team-up that I have to face before reaching Dagan Gera the first time. With the crossguard saber, it's really hard to maneuver around the small area, but after realizing I can just use this small tiny platform, I have to decide to kill the Stormtrooper Squad before dealing with the Val Biolemaw, I can pretty easily make it up to Dagan Gera. Unlike his second or third boss fight, Dagan's attacks are much slower during his first encounter, making them easy to parry and generally allowing for a much more enjoyable experience on my part. Once again, the crossguard's high damage came in quite handy in allowing me to quickly end the fight, and despite the absolute ass whooping I was giving him, it wasn't long before he escaped and I would have to try my luck again another day. While waiting for that inevitable confrontation, I quickly made my way over to Jeddah, where I discovered that jetpack troopers actually had the same attack patterns as normal stormtroopers, making them just as deadly, if only a little bit more tanky. Unfortunately for me though, the DT sentry droids remained just as annoying and powerful as ever, and the Scriden boss fight wasn't much better. Quick tip about Scridens: if you don't get past their giant claw, you're not going to do any real damage, which I was learning the hard way until eventually I figured it out. Just like with Zeke on Koboh, The ATSD fight wasn't too difficult, and afterwards I was finally able to link back up with Sierra and Cordova and start making my way over to the Shattered Moon, which was gonna turn out to be hell. Up until this point, I had actually been making pretty good progress on my run, which was why I was very sad and also slightly frustrated when things started going not so great. While the Bedlam Smasher, 2 Raider Veterans, and Droidicas weren't that difficult to deal with on my first go-around, after dying to the Magma Guard and being sent back to the beginning, I actually started struggling a lot and incurred several deaths that were quite frustrating to deal with. And it took me quite a while before I was even able to get past the Magma Guard. I then got stuck on the second major part of the first Shattered Moon run when I had to fight 2 BX Battle Droids and 1 Bedlam Smasher on a tiny platform with a center divider in it. Well, I could have probably just pushed them off the edge. I really wasn't thinking about that at the time, and instead just used the center divider to dance around them and slowly whittle them down, which often didn't lead to too many good results because I just end up being hit by a random attack anyways. But eventually, when I did get past them, I still had one more enemy to contend with. Now, Dryad Thorn's a pretty easy boss to get through if you actually play like a normal person, but I had this really bad habit of trying to parry everything, which was even worse on this boss fight since I didn't know Dryad Thorn's moveset, and I ended up getting hit a lot, which would lead to a lot of unnecessary deaths. Now, another thing that made this difficult was also the crossguard stance, which I know sounds kind of weird since the crossguard stance is pretty good against most bosses, but Dryad Thorn is really slippery, and since you can't apply a whole lot of pressure with the crossguard stance's slow attacks, you kind of just have to wait for him to attack back and just let him give you an opening to attack, which is really bad for me since I would take a lot of unnecessary damage, and I often wouldn't survive long enough to capitalize on most of those openings. Now, eventually, I did kill him after several tries, but even then, I still wasn't done because there was that tiny tutorial section right before you can go back to the Mantis, which has 3 BX Battle Droids and 1 Magma Guard, all in a tiny hallway. I probably wouldn't have gotten through this fight if I didn't figure out that you could actually just force pull the BX Battle Droids into the boss room because they don't like going in there. So you can just kind of pull them in one at a time and just like have a fair one-on-one fight, which I know might not be the most honorable way to fight, but this is Jedi Survivor, not Jedi Die with Honor. So I'm going to take it. Since the Devastated Settlement is pretty small, it's relatively easy to clear. The only problem with it is the double Grocko Matriarch fight that you have to get through during the second part of the puzzle, which is miserable. Even without the warrior perk equipped, this fight is still really difficult, but with it equipped, it feels like getting punched in the nuts by a guy on steroids. Even if I played the fight mostly perfectly, 1 or 2 small mistakes would end up setting me all the way back to ground zero, and it was starting to take me so long to take care of these guys. Thankfully, one of them did glitch out on me, so it became a lot easier to deal with them. And since they were the hardest thing in the area, it wasn't long before I was done with the Devastated Settlement. Thankfully, Jeddah was once again a breeze to get through, since even with the warrior perk equipped, most enemies only appeared in small groups, and so they couldn't really overwhelm me with numbers. Even fights that were difficult had terrain that favored me over my enemies, like this giant sand pillar that prevented the 2 purge troopers in the room from continually firing on me. This allowed me to way more easily deal with them. Going into the Lucrehulk section of Koboh was really nerve-wracking because the Lucrehulk has a lot of enemies that deal a lot of damage, and I wasn't sure how long it was going to take me to get through the area. Luckily for me though, all the time I'd spent fighting with the crossguard stance was finally paying off, and I was actually starting to get a rather good hang of how to fight in large groups with this thing. Unfortunately, Dagon's second fight was still pretty difficult for me, which wasn't all that surprising since I'd always struggled against him during his second encounter. During his second fight, his attacks are a lot faster, and the parrying timings on them can be a little bit confusing at times, which often led to my health bar going from full to 0 in a matter of seconds. Another annoying thing I learned, which is mostly a crossguard stance issue, is that if I wait too long to attack him, he'll just go into a full combo even if I hit him. So he'll just ignore damage and kill me immediately. This probably wouldn't have been a huge problem, but I had gotten into a bad habit with the crossguard stance of just pausing in between attacks sometimes, so I ended up struggling with this a lot. Even after getting the hang of his attacks, it still took me a while to beat him, and on the run I did, I almost didn't. A few small mistakes at the end almost killed me. So, yeah, it was pretty rough. However hard Dagon was, though, Ravus was going to be even harder. And the path to get to him was going to be pretty challenging, too. There are two things that make fighting through Shattered Moon really difficult. One is the really small and enclosed spaces you have to fight in. And two, the really high health, high damage enemies you have to fight in those spaces. Especially with the warrior perk equipped. Both of those things are made even worse when you have the crossguard stance because you're locked down for such a long time with your attacks and it just leaves you open to so many backstabs. Thankfully though, just like on Jeddah, there's a lot of different environmental tricks you can use to even the odds. Like this giant cannon in the middle of the room that I was able to, after a very long time, push and pull most of the enemies into and finish off the rest that were still remaining. Probably the hardest part of Shattered Moon, the lab area with the Bedlam Smasher on top, also has two fun little environmental tricks you can use. These two ledges that you can pull enemies onto and fight them one by one instead of fighting them in a large group, which is way nicer to deal with. Most unfortunately though, Ravus' boss fight arena is a very much enclosed space, and Ravus himself is absolutely bonkers. Ravus has two phases. And probably the worst thing about a boss with two phases on a no-heal run is that any damage you take in the first phase, you can't get back in the second phase, which makes it a hell of a lot more likely for you to get sent back all the way to the start. Thankfully, his first phase is relatively easy, and it didn't take me long to beat it pretty much perfectly. His second phase, though, is way harder, and it took me way longer to get the hang of it than the first phase. Ravus is also a very parry-heavy dependent boss. If you're not good at parrying, you're going to suffer. Luckily for me though, I'm actually not too horrible at parrying, despite what my earlier fight on Shattered Moon may have led you to believe. Also, the crossguard's high stamina means that missing one or two parries won't hurt me severely, but missing a lot will, so I don't do that. Eventually I do kill Ravus, and with him gone, it's back down to Koboh to fight Dagon one last time. Just like with Ravus though, there were still a few more challenges left before I could face Dagon for the final time. The first one being the Imperial Outpost on Koboh. When I first got to the base, I was a little bit surprised since the warrior perk didn't seem to change much about it. I was quickly reminded though that it didn't need to because the base already felt like being kicked in the nuts without it. The good news for me was that I was actually able to breeze through about 99% of the encounter after a few tries. The bad news for me was that the other 1% of the encounter was two DT sentry droids that, without Marin and Bode, are absolute nightmares to try and take down alone. However, if there is one thing that I learned, it is that with great enemies comes great obstacles I can use to stop them from doing annoying things, like these TIE fighters, which the sentry droids seem to have a really tough time navigating around. It still took me dozens of tries, but I was able to kill them eventually. And with them out of the way, I could finally move on to the Koboh Observatory. Man, I say finally a lot. Much like the Imperial base though, the first part of the Koboh Observatory was very easy to deal with. But unfortunately, once I reached Bode, I started having massive frame drops. No matter what I tried, resetting my computer, restarting the game, it didn't matter and the frame drops persisted, which meant that I had to play out one of the toughest encounters in the game with less than ideal frames. The experience was miserable, especially when I got to the part of the encounter where I had to face off against two Bedlam Smashers, which would have been difficult even without the frame drops, but it was even more difficult with the frame drops. Sure, the crossguard stance does have a lot of damage, but the Bedlam Smashers have such large health pools that it doesn't really seem to matter, and their constant hammer smashes are a pain in the ass to try and dodge, especially in the close quarters space. After a while, I was able to find a ledge that I could escape to that was just out of their reach, and with the help of Bode's team up ability, I was able to eventually take them down after a very long time of the lovely strategy, attack and flee. That sounds so dumb. My hands were still sweating quite profusely though, as I quickly realized that there wasn't actually a checkpoint after this section. No, the checkpoint is behind a horde of B1 battle droids, two B2 battle droids,
and 1 Magma Guard, meaning I had to get past all of them before I could save my progress, while I was on 1 HP. This was probably the most stressed I've ever been on this playthrough, and I ended up hiding 99% of the time and using my last slow in order to actually get to the checkpoint, so that way I didn't die beforehand. After that lovely situation, I quickly took a break, and when I came back, thankfully my frames were restored, and so I went into Dagon's third encounter with probably way too much confidence. That being said, my first one was actually pretty good, and with the knowledge I had acquired from Dagon's second encounter, I was actually able to make it all the way to his third stage before finally dying. But unfortunately from there, it all went downhill. I began making a lot of stupid mistakes, which always seems to happen after a good first run, and it was a long time before I made it back to his third stage. Despite how difficult his third stage is because of how many different moves he adds in, it was actually a lot of fun just like getting to learn how to counter them all differently. For example, one of the things I learned was that for his clones, if you just slam them into the ground, they just immediately die without you having to do anything. It's really quite an easy way to get rid of them. The second thing I realized, which I think applies to most of Dagon's stages, not just his third one, is that if you quickly dash towards him after knocking him down, you can actually continue attacking him and he won't go on the offensive, which means that if you're pretty good at dodging his counterattacks when he parries you, you'll actually avoid any of his major high damage combos that he does when he goes on the offensive. As I defeated Dagon for the last time and watched his final cutscene play out, I couldn't help but let out a small sigh of relief, as I knew that the journey was almost over, and soon I will be able to stop doing all of this. My first stop on the road to the end was Jeddah, where, after Bo had betrayed us, I got to play as Seer for the first and only time during this playthrough. There isn't really anything much to talk about in this section since it goes about the same as any normal playthrough, with the only exception being that I still can't heal or rest at meditation points. This does make Darth Vader's boss fight ever so slightly more stressful, but his attacks are pretty straightforward and not that difficult to parry, so it isn't long before I've won and Seer is fallen on the floor. At Nova Garon, things become a little bit more difficult, but not insanely hard. Unlike the Imperial Outpost on Koboh, Nova Garon has a lot more interconnected rooms that I can use to easily isolate fights, like this opening and closing door, which for whatever reason only opens for Cal, allowing me to lure Imperials into it and slaughter them one by one. There's also a lot of enemies that I can lure out of their normal combat zones, which makes them glitch out and not fight back when I hit them, which is also really nice. Even though I can't defeat enemies with Cal's lightsaber when he taps into the dark side, Cal's beefed up force abilities allow me to kill most enemies by simply just force pushing them into something. Probably the only enemy I can't do this to is the DT sentry droids, which became quite an interesting problem when I had to fight a horde of them to get out of the hangar. Good news was that the edge of the hangar is actually the end of their combat zone, so as long as I walked over there, they wouldn't actually attack me, and I could just repeatedly use force push to get them closer and closer to the edge until I'd push them off. The second to last stop on my journey was going to be Koboh once again, where I would have to fight off waves of Imperials if I wanted to activate the forest arrays. Most of the encounter could be dealt with by using simple hit and run tactics. That was until I got to the 2 Viper Commandos at the end. Without cover, there was really no way for me to break up their constant barrage of blaster fire, and getting in close to deal with one of them would leave me vulnerable to the other. I realized though that I needed to save Cal's Force Rage for the final wave, rather than using it the moment I got it, which I was doing for the second to last wave, which meant that I would die pretty quickly in the last wave. But after I realized that, I was easily able to deal with them, and I was moving on to Tanalore. Now, Bode has a very interesting boss fight. Interesting in the sense that it never fails to annoy me. His attacks have really weird parry timings, and they absolutely shred through both your health bar and stamina bar, even with the crossguard's high defense. He actually probably does the most damage to your stamina bar, which is pretty bad because, like I said earlier, it's hard to parry them, and I get hit a lot. There's also plenty of times when Bode, like Dagon, will just ignore damage and combo through it. And for most of the fight, I ended up staying on the defensive, keeping my distance and only going into attack whenever there was an opening in between Bode's strikes. This strategy became a lot more effective during Bode's third phase, since in his rage, I could more easily bait out some of his long-range attacks, which had really long recovery times and would leave him vulnerable for much longer than normal. Before I knew it, Bode was gone, and as Cal looked upon the burning pyres of his friends and family, I was finally able to rest, as this is the end of the story. I didn't have to do anything more, and the project that had taken me so long to complete was over and done with. And I could finally get on to the toughest part, editing this stupid video. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. My first time trying something like this, and I really hope it turned out well. So hope you learned something new from it, or just enjoyed it in general, or maybe you didn't. And if you have any feedback, please leave it in the comments. Have a nice day.